Hi there, welcome back to another episode of Dave's Desk, continuing our series of looking at building blocks. And last week we covered all of three chapters of the first three chapters of the Bible, and this week we're probably going to cover, in slightly less detail, the whole of the rest of the Bible. And we're going to begin by looking at the faithfulness of God. So if you remember, at the end of last week, humanity turned their back on God in Genesis 3, and the rest of the Bible is the story of God's faithfulness and his searching out people who will return to him and commit themselves to him. And in Genesis we see that as God chooses Abraham and turns Abraham's family into a nation. And then in Exodus he draws that nation out of slavery in Egypt, brings them through the wilderness right up to the promised land, this place he would give them to inhabit. And just at that moment when everything seems so possible, the Israelites don't trust God and they turn their back on him. They think he isn't who he says he is, that he can't love them the way he says that he loves them. And so the rest of the book of Exodus and Leviticus, Deuteronomy, Numbers is all a story of God searching out his people, remaining faithful to them in the wilderness, looking after them when they've turned their back on him, and drawing them eventually in Joshua to enter the promised land. And then Joshua, through Judges, the book of Samuel and Kings and Chronicles, these books of the history of God's people are books which tell the story of God's people turning to God and being saved, turning away from him, coming to this place of suffering and oppression, turning back to God, being delivered once more, and this cycle continues over and over again. And right at the heart of this history of Israel is the book of Ruth. And the book of Ruth tells this really small local story of someone who remains faithful, who chooses loyalty and kindness above everything else. And it's a story about how we should respond to each other, how we should show love and kindness to each other. But in its context, in the midst of the history of Israel, it's a reminder to us of how God is always kind and always faithful to his people. He's always making the right choice for us and enabling us to find him. And for me, that's really important, because it's not just on these big scales that people who claim to follow God have spent time going towards him and time turning their back on him. It's also for us personally. And that reminder that no matter whether we are finding it easy to follow God's call on our lives and walk in his way, or finding it hard, whether we're in a place of joy or a place of feeling oppressed and struggling, that when we choose to turn to him, he will be there with open arms, faithful, never leaving our side. Amen. I hope you found some encouragement in that today. I hope to see you again soon. Goodbye.